It was the golden age of rock and roll in the 1917s. The music business was full of young, talented artists, and arenas were packed with screaming fans. The weight of fame made it hard to tell the difference between friends and rivals. There weren't many stars as bright as guitar virtuoso Peter Frampton at that time. His live album, Frampton Comes Alive, made him an overnight sensation, but behind the million-dollar record deals and charming smile was a world of fights, betrayals, and secrets that no one knew about. Would come back to haunt him today. Ringo Starr, one of the few remaining rock stars who stood by Frampton, has finally spoken out. His words have shocked the industry and shown a darker side of the man who was once one of the most famous musicians of his time. Imagine these two rock legends standing together on stage, blinded by music and a shared history of success. Ringo Starr, who used to be a Beatle and was now the link between rock's song's most important band, and Peter Frampton, he was the golden boy of the 1970s, and his picture was in every music magazine in the world. But even the strongest rock alliances can break down, and theirs did spectacularly. Their fight wasn't just about music. It was also about loyalty and betrayal between a man who seemed to have everything but made decisions that drove away even his closest friends. Starr had been a fan of Frampton for a long time and invited him to play in his all-star band. He also gave Frampton a stage when the wild Frampton's solo business was taking a back seat. Something changed. There were rumors that he was too proud to thank the people who had helped him along the way, like a rock star whose ego got the best of him behind closed doors. Tensions rose because Starr, who had seen it all in the music business, didn't like how Frampton was acting. What had been mutual respect turned into cold indifference, and friendship turned into frustration and sadness. The final blow came when Starr, after years of they were no longer loyal to each other, and their friendship ended. Another casualty of the tough world of rock and roll. In the mid-1970s, Peter Frampton became a star in the music business, but he had a lot of problems with that business. Frampton Comes Alive became one of the best-selling live records of all time, shooting him to superstardom overnight. But as the saying goes, if you go too high too fast, you'll fall. Frampton was pushed by his managers, who wanted to make money off of his fame, into a whirlwind of commercial projects that took away the very thing that made him great. His artistry albums, like I'm in You 1, 1977, were made for mass appeal, giving up the raw, real sound that had made Frampton a legend. Fans noticed that critics pounced, calling him a sellout who had traded true rock and roll for pop ballads and commercials. The industry turned its back on him. The same record people in charge who used to praise him now saw him as he was a used, rejected product that was left to watch as his career fell apart right in front of his eyes. Picture this. The spotlight shines on the crowd, roars, and Peter Frampton is at the top of his game. His golden hair sparkles in the stage lights, and his guitar wailing like a soulful cry. But beyond the cheers and adoring fans, there was a different soundtrack playing, a bitter, discordant melody of broken friendships, shattered egos, and betrayals that lingered for a long time. After the final encore, Frampton's fame grew, but it seemed like the higher he went, the more people he left behind. At the center of Frampton's tumultuous relationship with Steve Marriott, his former bandmate from Humble Pie, they weren't just co-workers, they were brothers in arms, forging a way through the rough terrain of the late 1916 S-rock scene. Marriott's rough, soulful singing went well with Frampton's smooth, melodic guitar wizardry, making a sound that was all its own. That was raw, powerful, and revolutionary. Together, they seemed unstoppable. But fame has a cruel way of showing the shit that lies beneath even the strongest foundations. As Frampton's status began to rise, he became restless. The creative spark that had started their partnership was now stifled by competing egos and different artistic visions. Marriott, on the other hand, saw Frampton's desire as an act of betrayal and a selfish grab for power. Frampton, who was a perfectionist, felt stifled by Marriott's strong but often unpredictable leadership, the attention away from the band that had helped him grow. When Frampton quit in 1971, it wasn't just a professional split, it was a personal one as well. Moreau was furious that he felt like he had been left behind when they were at the peak of their promise. Their last days together were filled with heated arguments. Anger caused doors to slam and sharp words to reverberate long after Frampton left. The betrayal cut deep, and even though years passed, the wound never healed. Marriott took his anger to his grave. When Frampton died in a tragic house fire on January 1, 1991, their fight was still unresolved, and it would forever be a ghost in his legacy. If Frampton's feud with Marriott was personal, his feud with Keith Richards was pure, unfiltered rock and roll rivalry. In the early days of his solo career, Frampton was welcomed into the exclusive inner circle of the Rolling Stones. The band admired his talent and even invited him to jam during recording and reporting sessions. For young Frampton, it was a dream come true, until that dream came true. As Frampton's fame grew with Frampton Comes Alive, so did his ego. He went from being an eager, humble guitarist looking to learn from the greats to becoming the golden boy of rock, appearing on magazine covers and basking in the adoration of millions. This didn't sit well with Richards, who was the ultimate rock rebel and hated anything that was commercially polished or manufactured success. The tension between them was palpable. Richards didn't hold back when he made fun of Frampton's music in comments, calling it soft rock. His clean-cut look was too pretty for rock and roll, which was meant for people who don't like real rock. A barely veiled jab at both his looks and what people thought was his lack of toughness, Frampton fired back with passive aggressiveness. He was hurt, but too proud to show it. Jabs about the Stones' feuds being stuck in the past. Their fights had been going on for years, with a toxic mix of artistic snobbery, hurt pride, and jealousy playing out in the press and behind the scenes at industry events. They'd pass each other at award shows with cold looks. Their brief, tense interactions were a far cry from the friendship they used to have. Then there was David Bowie, who had known Frampton long before the fame, fortune, and fights. They were schoolmates who were united by their love of music and their rebelliousness, which made them stand out from their peers. Their friendship survived the rough times of early adulthood, with Bowie's meteoric rise paralleling Frampton's steady rise. But fame changed everything when Bowie asked Frampton to join him in 1997. The Glass Spider Tour seemed like a get-together of like-minded people, but behind the bright lights. When it came to stage production and their electric performances, tensions were building. Bowie, as a charismatic frontman, naturally commanded the stage, while Frampton, who had been the star of his solo career, was relegated to the role of just the guitarist, which hurt his ego. There were rumors that Bowie was jealous of how easily Frampton controlled the stage, shine on backstage. Their once easy friendship became tense. Frampton felt pushed to the background and like a supporting act in a show where he thought he should have been the main attraction. Bowie was focused on the artistic vision of the tour and didn't seem to notice or care that Frampton was getting more and more angry. Their friendship, which used to be based on real love, turned into a fragile truce that was strained by unsaid grudges and the complicated dynamics of power and fame. Even though they were polite to each other in public, the warmth of their early bond was gone, replaced by a polite distance that never quite filled the gap left by their different paths. The one person who was involved in all of these broken relationships was Fran himself. His never-ending drive for success and the alluring effects of fame created a cycle of connecting and disconnecting. As his work took off, he felt insecure and proud, which hurt his relationships with other people. Frampton's close friends became acquaintances, and acquaintances turned into faraway memories. The very success he had been hoping for became a wall between him and the people who mattered most to him. His need for approval through fame didn't leave much room for being vulnerable, admitting mistakes, or just being human. And maybe that's the saddest part of Peter Frampton's story, hidden behind that beautiful smile. The famous guitar riffs and the songs played at stadiums, he was haunted by the ties he'd broken, the bridges he'd burned, and the people he'd left behind in his never-ending search for something. That couldn't fill the void in the end, but Peter Frampton may have fought his biggest fight with himself. His rise to fame was thrilling, but his fall was heartbreaking. Millions of people no longer loved Frampton, and his albums were no longer topping the charts. His tours were no longer selling out, and the industry had moved on. To deal with the pain of seeing his dreams fade away, Frampton turned to alcohol and prescription drugs. The charismatic Golden Haw rock god was now a shadow of his former self. Trying hard to keep his career and personal life together, his relationships broke down, marriages ended, and friendships faded. The once famous musician found himself alone and trapped in the silence that followed when the music stopped playing. Fans had left, the industry had left, and even some of his closest friends had grown apart. There were times when it looked like he might not make it back, when the weight of regret, addiction, and self-doubt threatened to swallow him whole. Framer's story is more than one, of fame and failure, but also of a man who had to face his own problems. The cockiness, betrayals, and unchecked ambition that Frampton had all come back to haunt him today in the form of Ringo Starr's words, which are a painful reminder of the broken pieces he left behind. But is his legacy really ruined, or is it a lesson in the dangers of fame, ego, and the music industry's cruel machine? People may never be able to fully forget Peter Frampton's past, but one thing is for sure, his story is just as powerful and unforgettable as the music he made everyone love him.